Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Sunday Messages. Today, we are talking about the ego. My take on this is very different from other people's, I have come to realize. And this came up recently in Clown, and I've been sitting on it for quite some time. When I was giving that lecture, we ended up talking about egos and all of the things that they say, and there was all of this stuff that came up in that class. And I realized that a lot of people aren't actually using their ego. And a lot of the time, the ego is the very thing that people are bullying. Kill the ego, deny the ego, don't listen to the ego. If anything is based in your ego, then it's bad, it's wrong, you shouldn't listen to it. If your ego wants it, then you definitely shouldn't want it. And all of that is going to lead to a lot of suffering, in my opinion. My relationship with Jessica, for those of you who are new, or maybe someone sent you this episode, Jessica is my ego. I love Jessica so much. I love Jessica with every fiber of my being. I have so much to thank Jessica for, and this is why a lot of people are resisting this kind of relationship with their ego for some perception of morality or higher levels of spirituality. It takes shape in many different forms in terms of why people, first of all, people think they can kill the ego. You can't. It's still there. It's going to be there. As long as you are in a body, you have an ego, you can't get away from it. So what are you going to do? Fight it? Be angry at it all the time? Try to kill it? Go to war with it. That'll bring you a lot of peace. And it's funny that I make this snide joke right there, because what you have to understand, if you like my sassiness, or if you like my intensity, if you like my fire, if you like that I bring it through my work, if you like these aspects of me, you like Jessica. If you like my dark humor, that's Jessica. If you like when I go on a rant, that's Jessica. A lot of the time, our personalities are anchored in our ego, because our ego is actually what helps us acclimate to being human. So if you try to kill your ego, what you're saying is, I don't want to have a personality. And that's fine. I like my personality. I like my sass. I like my fire. I like Jessica. I like the structure that was formed in childhood that allowed me to navigate and cope in my environment. I like that part of myself, even though there are some areas where I've really had to do some pruning so that Jessica didn't destroy, my romantic life. There's a lot of things that if the ego goes unchecked, then you're going to have a problem. But if you have a healthy relationship with your ego, you get to retain a personality and the sense of humor that you have and all of the goods. All of the desires, all of the discernment, all of the preferences, that lives in the ego. So I feel very strongly about loving your ego, developing a relationship with your ego, understanding where it's harmful and where it's helpful is absolutely one of the best things that you could possibly do for yourself, because it's going to make dealing with your human a lot easier. Constant attempts to reject the human part of you is just going to make you really frustrated and actually punishing. I find a lot of the time if you attempt to punish the ego or deny this crucial part of yourself. It's crucial because if it wasn't crucial, we wouldn't all have one. It's like everyone has a brain too. It's kind of a crucial part of being human. The ego is no different. Okay, before I bust open this can of worms fully, I want you to know that it is open application season for Eden, which is my 6-month mastermind. It's going to be running all year, but it's in a 6-month container. And for this next cohort, I have done something really, really exciting, which is you get monthly readings, so personal monthly readings when you're in Eden. So all the members get a personal reading at the beginning of the month. In the middle of the month, you get a new guide to work with. So I've actually blended together Cosmic Council and Eden into one. So now it's like you're going to have this fleshed out spiritual team to carry with you for the rest of your life, to use at your disposal. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be epic. And I'm just so excited that now there's even more of this intuitive and psychic development component to the mastermind. Oh, it's going to be so good. It's going to be so good. I'm absolutely stoked about it. I am obsessed with it. I cannot wait to see what happens. It's going to be amazing. The thing that I really want to highlight here is that I landed on the words that I have chosen for 2022. And they are magical and elevate. So elevated standards, elevated expectations, elevated results, elevated everything. I want everything to be elevated in 2022. And I really want things to feel magical. Now, of course, it's like everything is just energetics. But when we get to bring in these elements of it being highly visual, highly sensory, or when we start to incorporate more meditation, more ritual, all of these pieces that can take something that we would overlook or consider to be ordinary, and then all of a sudden, not only can you elevate it, but you can now make it sacred, and you can make it magical, and you can make it feel like this whimsical element of your life that you just cannot get enough of. That is what I want for people in Eden. That is what I want to see come through. I'm so excited for it. I'm like over the moon with what has come through. So, if you feel called to magic in 2022, if you feel called to more intuition, embracing the witchy lineage, or focusing on energetics, or working with more guides, if you're really drawn to that, apply to Eden. It is truly the most magical and dynamic co-creative container that I know of. I get really excited about my masterminds because I don't know where else they exist. I've never seen anyone else curate things the way that I have and design things the way that I have. So I get jazzed about it because it's like, well, what is going to happen? I don't even know, because I keep creating things and then bringing them into these containers. Okay, enough. I'm just really excited. If you want to apply, link is in the show notes, in the description box, wherever, onyxhealing.com/Eden. Come play with me. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be magical. It's going to be elevated. It's going to be epic. I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's just start with the basics really quick. When it comes to where your ego came from, you were born into the family lineage that you chose before you came onto Earth. Okay, you incarnated. Great, wonderful. Then you started moving through your family system. You started socializing at school or whatever it is that you were doing as you grew up, homeschooling, whatever it is that you did, whatever type of city or culture or religion you grew up in, whatever part of the world, country, state that you grew up in. And all of these factors resulted in you developing parts of yourself that allow you to navigate these environments with ease. So essentially, the ego is the keeper of all of your adaptations as well as your desires. When I say adaptations, I don't mean bad. It's going to be a mixed bag for pretty much everybody. You're going to have some things that are really, really wonderful about you that are adaptations to the environment and the family that you grew up in. And there's going to be some stuff that's really dysfunctional that you have to release in order to expand. So you're playing both fields at the same time when we're talking about the ego. Your job is to be able to steer the ship in a way where you're keeping the goods, but tossing the elements that are more destructive or are regressive. Because if you leave it unchecked, then the ego can kind of start running you. And when you gain enough consciousness, ideally, you want to be running your ego, right? Jessica isn't in charge. I'm in charge. Jessica is a co-pilot. She has a lot of wisdom. She has a lot of information. She has a lot of funny things to say. She has all sorts of things that I am not going to destroy. And if I were to let her make all of the decisions, steer the ship, she's going to crash us into the rocks. She's kind of like, you can think about your ego as a funny, cool teenager, but that doesn't have their license yet. So you should never let them drive a heavy piece of machinery, but they can sit in the passenger seat, they can choose the music, they can make funny commentary, they can do all of these things, but they are not driving. That is the best way that I can describe my relationship with Jessica. Now, if you're wondering, where is the line, Sydney? Where is the line between what do I listen to my ego on and what do I ignore them on? Here's how I make the distinction for myself. If it is harmful to me, meaning if it inspires really intense negative emotion, it's not helping me. If it discourages me, punishes me, is harmful to me, those are not the pieces that I want to bring forward and carry throughout my life. Those are the pieces that I have to ignore her on. For a very long time, I would take the bait every time. It was really hard for me to not get sucked into the mental chatter that I was being presented because it was old, it was familiar, it was all sorts of things that are very enticing when you don't have really good control over your thoughts and your emotions. And so because of that, it's really important to be observant of what's happening internally, what you're saying to yourself, and then how what you're saying to yourself is making you feel. So the boundary that I have with Jessica is I do not listen to her on anything that makes me feel bad. In my experience, and I can't speak for everybody because I don't know how this is actually going to present for you. In my experience with Jessica, I don't consider her to be emotionally evolved. So she is emotionally stunted, which is why I can't trust her when it comes to things that are of an emotional nature. When it comes to things that are of an emotional nature, I trust my soul. So think about it like this. You have past, present, future. It doesn't actually work this way, but stay with me. So your ego is the past. Right? It's all of the things that have culminated and accumulated over time, all of the adaptations that have gone on over time. You, present day you are steering the ship. You are in charge. You are the consciousness in form. Okay? So you're observing what's happening and then responding or reacting in some cases to what the ego is presenting to you, to what your soul is presenting to you, blah, blah, blah. The future aspect of you is your soul. This is the North Star, the point of your evolution. This is the aspects of you that you actually want to step into. And the thing is, there is entanglement between past, present, and future all the time. So they can't be separated, which is why you can't kill the ego and you can't ignore the soul. Those two things will not work. They're both going to be there. They're both going to be poking and prodding you, depending on the time of day and what's going on. And you can't ignore them. That's the key thing here. Ignoring them is what leads to suffering. I know that I've said this before. I can't remember which episode it was on. But I said if you deny the call of your soul, I believe that that is what leads to suffering. Because it cripples you and the situation will get worse until you finally give in to what your soul is guiding you to do. Now, here's where things get interesting. Your soul is hooked up into what we could call collective consciousness or God. So this part of you is not going to have judgments. It's also not going to have negative emotion either, because your negative emotion only exists with density. It only exists on the earth plane. So that part of you cannot experience any type of distress or negative emotion or negative perspective or negative thought forms. It is the purest essence of you. This is the part of you that completely takes over when you die. When you die, the only thing that's happening is you no longer experience duality or what we experience as separation, whatever you want to call it. Contrast, 3D, density, whatever, the earth experience. The only thing that really happens is that there isn't any type of material or conceptual barrier between you and your soul. Now, of course, there isn't a barrier right now, but that's how we experience duality, or the 3D plane, is we really, really believe what we're in. This is getting way too meta. I'm going to try to reel this in as best as I can, okay? So you have this ever-present, pulsing, energetic connection to collective consciousness, which I'm calling your soul. And this part of you is always going to have higher perspective on all things. So it's not going to see wrongdoing. It's not going to have any of those negative perspectives or judgments. And that's necessary. It's necessary for you to have that part of yourself. Now, where the ego is most crucial and most helpful is when it comes to desires, when it comes to your unique expression in form, and when it comes to preferences. So the same way there's an aspect of you that does not experience judgment. In order to navigate Earth, you also need the judgment. And that's what lives with your ego. Your ego is what's helping you do Earth, basically. The only reason why you can do Earth at all is because of your ego. So, for example, if someone came up and punched you in the mouth, would you like that or not? If you're answering, no, I would not like being punched in the mouth, that's your ego. Your ego is making a judgment, hey, we don't like this. Obviously, no one in their right mind is honestly going to say, well, that is just egotistical. That is just so self-centered. Your ego is out of control for thinking that it's, unsavory for someone to punch you in the mouth. But this is what people have conflated it with. What I'm saying is that the ego is a much more active daily participant in your life that you kind of need to, have a relationship with and get to know and capitalize on and use to your advantage, so that you don't feel miserable or being in constant criticism of or fear of, am I in my ego right now? You're always going to be in your ego because your ego is what's helping you navigate Earth. You can't separate yourself from that part, at least when you're in a body. Your ego is what helps you understand, I don't like that, or I'm experiencing this lack right now, or this scarcity, or this whatever. So it makes me feel like I want more. I want to receive more. I want to experience more love. I want to experience more play. I want to experience more money. I want to experience more blah, blah, blah. I want more fulfillment, more wellness, more, right? Everyone wants something. So if you took heaven's nectar, day one is sacred hunger. We're all hungry. We all want more. We all have desires. That's the point. Here's the thing, even if you live a quaint, charming life on a tiny little piece of land, maybe you just have like some ducks and chickens and a pig or whatever, right? Maybe you have a very simple, charming life. Even in that case, there would be things that you would want. Maybe the Piggy is sick, and so you want Piggy to be well, or you've had a whole bunch of rain and you would like to see some sunshine, or you want clean sheets, or you would like to try a new recipe. The wanting never stops. It just looks like different things depending on the context. So even in a situation where a lot of people are saying, oh, you're living a modest life, it doesn't mean the desire doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that your ego just isn't anywhere to be found, or that modesty is the equivalent of not having an ego. It's just that based on the body that you chose, the lineage that you chose, the life experience that you've had, the environment that you grew up in, your ego has adapted and then figured out different preferences of what it likes and what it doesn't, and is now informing you of those preferences, which is pushing you to expand. The reason why this matters is that your ego is who decides, I really like that shirt, I don't like that shirt. Your ego is the one who decides, I love that cereal, I don't like that cereal. Or that sounds like a really cool vacation, I have no interest in going there. Your ego is the one who keeps all of that stuff, who understands all of that stuff, who gives you that sensation of pleasure or pain. Not to mention, when we're talking about what you like, what you don't like, what you're into, what you're not, that combination is what leads to your unique essence. So on top of that, your identity, your individuality, the feeling of you, the expression of you, is all filtered through your ego in some capacity. I would even go as far as to say, even if you chose a monk life, if you traded in all of your colorful clothing, all of your denim, all of your corduroy, who wears corduroy anymore? I actually do have a pair of green corduroy pants, so. Anyway, you ditch all fabric, okay? Maybe you just walk around in a white robe or a loincloth or something. You get back to your primitive roots. Or, you shave all the hair off your body and you try to become as naked and neutral as possible. Just that choice alone would have to be filtered through the ego to even get to the point where you decide I prefer this, or I like this idea better, so I'm going to move forward into that. comes from the ego somehow. Like, there's gonna be a connection to it somehow, even in your attempt to eliminate it. Because you have to get to the point where that is something that you've contemplated and then in some capacity made a judgment about that lifestyle. So, therefore, that was an ego-based decision. Now, here's, once again, I feel like I could to some sound like I'm contradicting myself by saying there are some things where you really do not want the ego to be making any decisions. And there's some places where it's really helpful. So when it comes to the consciousness that is you, right, what I would call Sydney, the concentrated consciousness that is in this body, in this lifetime, connected to this lineage, in this incarnation, in this time and space, that part of me, what I know as being Sydney, that is the intermediary between my ego and my soul. So I am what's able to focus or put my attention on either one. That's really what I, Sydney, am able to do in any given moment, is point and focus and pay attention to all of these different aspects of self, and then from there make decisions that are in alignment one way or another. So, for example, let's take clothing. This is like an easy one to understand. Jessica has this very clear vision of what we would like our wardrobe to look like. Oh, it's so full of like fine fabrics and silks and like sheer blouses and all of this beautiful lingerie and all sorts of things. All sorts of things that she has in there, all of these cute dresses, right? She has a very clear picture of what she likes and what she thinks is trash. However, if I were to show her certain photos and be like, okay, what do you think about that outfit? She would be like, oh God, I can't believe you wore that. Does anyone else have copies of these photos? We need to eliminate these from the face of the planet. Okay, that would be her response to certain clothing that I've worn in the past, because she is the filter between likes and dislikes. So her reaction to things is very, very strong. Whereas, let's say I showed the photograph to my soul, it would just be like, ah, yes. I remember that stage of our evolution. What a beautiful process of expansion you were in. There would be ultimate neutrality. There would be nothing but loving essence that would be showered upon it. Like it wouldn't be contrasted in any capacity. It would be nothing but affirmative. Now, if we took this in a direction of an interpersonal relationship, it sounds different, obviously, because the context is different, but it's the same idea. If someone does something that I really don't like, she tells me. She's like, this is bullshit. Then I can flip into higher perspective. I can start pointing my attention in the direction of my soul and get a different perspective from there, from that vantage point, and decide, right, I'm the intermediary, decide what to do next. Jessica is letting me know, boundary, no, don't like, absolutely not. She lets me know. Now, in terms of her primitive communication, obviously, before I do anything like set boundaries, I need to gain higher perspective. She's helping me feel into the yes and the no, and there's also the higher consciousness, the higher self aspect of me that is going to support me in navigating the communication and how everything unfolds. Now, here's where there's obviously going to be a lot of variation. I am only speaking from my particular ego. Now, the interesting thing is that the vast majority, I would actually say all of my clients hire me because of my ego. I don't know a single person who would hire me if they didn't actually like Jessica, because all of the components that make up her are what I get hired for. So a lot of the time I get hired because of my humor. I can't tell you how many times I've been told that. That's Jessica. My sense of humor had to come from my family. It came from my trauma, my life experience. My dark humor is very potent. So that is very much a part of my ego. The same thing would go for my personal values and philosophies. Those came from Jessica being exposed to a lot of different ways of thinking. And then her informing me of what I like, what feels like a yes, what feels like a no. And then from there, them just being buffed and polished into what I now experience as my, Sydney's, personal values. It's also interesting because there are a lot of very soft-spoken, gentle people who are gravitated towards my work because they want my fire. They're like, I don't necessarily have a spine, but you definitely do. I need to hire you for that. Good choice, right? I can support in transferring over this energetic pattern through osmosis of working together, right? So a lot of these things come from my ego. That's where it originates. I know it's funny, but I feel like Jessica is actually who people hire. The reason why you can feel me so intensely is because of her. Now, again, in the dysfunctional sense, it can go wrong. So for a lot of people who are listening, maybe you have the experience of being too soft, being overly accommodating, not having good boundaries. So the same thing would apply in the sense that your ego is still going to tell you, hey, we don't like that. However, the split off is really where the adaptation kicks into gear, because whatever comes after the preference piece is where the diversity really, really lives, because we all have yeses and nos. Some people struggle with discerning what is a yes or a no, but that's usually a really extreme trauma response. I'm not getting into all of that. However, we all have it no matter how subtle it is. So whatever lives right after the we like this or don't like this is more than likely pointing at some type of dysfunction. Okay, because we're talking exclusively about what the ego is going to say. Your ego is always going to orient towards the adaptation of the past, what happened in the past and how you dealt with it and coped with it and survived in that environment. So the thing is, Jessica is very, very brutal. She is mean. She is out for blood. She is not here to play games. She does not care about your feelings. She is not considering you. She does not care about you. That is the dysfunctional adaptation of Jessica. She is ruthless, and in the same breath, she is a fantastic advocate. Truly, because of Jessica, I am impossible to manipulate. Impossible. It can't be done. Can't be done. She won't let you. She has such little tolerance for things that aren't even manipulative. If it were to even get to the point where you're in the manipulation range, she said no way before you even got to that point. So obviously, she's an exceptional protector. She's an exceptional advocate. She's exceptionally powerful. She has very intense boundaries. She is very clear in her truth. It's her truth that is very, very clear. And she doesn't apologize for it. And this is another thing that's a gift, because it's so interesting. It's actually led to me having a lot of integrity. My unapologetic nature that stems from her makes me very stable in terms of how I hold myself, how I handle myself in conflict, where my boundaries are. Like, there are so many nuanced advantages of having this type of adaptation. However, it can also rain hellfire on people for no goddamn reason. That is also true. In excess, in imbalance, it can be a real problem. It can be extremely destructive. It is not helpful. It is not kind. It does not make me friends, and it's not good. If you struggle with the opposite, your ego might sound something like, oh my God, we really don't like that. However, you should never breathe a word of this. Just be really passive aggressive. Maybe they'll bring it up. Maybe they'll bring it up if you sulk long enough. And then you might be able to like squeak out a word, maybe, kind of, sort of. Or, you know what, better yet, you can just tell them that nothing is wrong and continue to sulk. And then if you're sulking, but you never confront them, they have no reason to be mad at you. Because this is what we learned at home. It worked really well at home back in the day, so we should just keep doing that. And the thing is, it's harder for me to speak to this because I don't personally know all of the gifts that come from that adaptation, but I can imagine your sensitivity, your desire to accommodate others and be good to others, and, not necessarily initiate conflict unnecessarily, but process personally. There could be so many golden nuggets that live inside of that. I can guarantee you there are. I just can't rattle them off because, I don't live with that every day. So let me wrap up this final point, or what we could call the final stage, the most sophisticated way, in my opinion, to be working with the ego. This is how I do it. This is what I would suggest for others, and this is what I've come to the conclusion of. Ego reflects back to you, we like this, we don't. Okay, so the preference is done. Your ego is going to make a suggestion on how you should handle it based on past experiences. That is the part that you need to put on the back burner. You need to question, put that thing under a microscope and ask, does that actually get you the results that you want to get from this situation? Is it going to result in resentment? Is it going to result in you burning down a bridge? Is it going to result in you saying something hurtful? Is it going to result in something else that really would not be supportive for you or the people around you? That's where you need to be very, very critical of the suggestion that's being presented. So this is where you're interfacing with multiple parts of self. The preference is made. Where you actually want to go with next steps is your soul. Then you want to consult the highest aspect of yourself so that what you can actually step into is the point of your evolution rather than the ego, which is always going to regress you, essentially. Because remember, it's living in the past. And while all of your life experiences are what have shaped your point of expansion, right? It's what's defined your soul, essentially. You still have to sync up with your soul. You want to actually merge in terms of what you're moving towards, what you're stepping into, so that we don't go back to the initial problem of it causing suffering. You ignore the call of your soul, you're going to suffer. If you reject the clarity and wisdom and information that your ego is giving you about your preferences, that is also something that can result in suffering if you're not mindful of this. So it's more about how you're using what. Just know that the next steps moving forward, ideally, we want those to be directed by your soul. You want to be consulting the soul in these situations to receive the best possible outcome. So that is what I would recommend in terms of how you're using what and the function of each piece, and then how to capitalize on it the most while also generating positive motion in the direction that you want to go. Now, something that you're going to hear after this podcast episode, you're going to hear people say it all of the time, which is, oh, that's an ego-based decision, or you're coming from your ego, or whatever. And your job, or what I would suggest, is you need to discern, is it coming from the ego in terms of developing a preference, which is crucial, you do need that aspect, or is this something where you're behaving in a regressive, harmful way that is not congruent with the highest version of yourself? So that way you can actually tease apart what's actually happening here, and if someone is reflecting that about you or anyone else, you can actually see clearly, was this a destructive, regressive behavior from previous wounds or just a preference? Because there are a lot of people who, particularly around the material world, side note on that, in the middle of this episode, I went on this huge side lane. I got sidetracked about the concept of being materialistic. So this is generally where I hear people go with this, and just know that an episode on being materialistic is coming soon, because we all know that I completely reject this idea that materialism is a bad thing by any stretch. So that episode will be coming soon. I cropped that portion of the episode out and I put it in a different episode so that, this can be more cohesive. So back to the ego piece. A lot of the time I hear people saying it's egotistical to want nice things, or buy a luxury good, or invest in blah, 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 right? All of that stuff. And so you might hear that a lot, but once again, how you expand is through your ego, developing preferences, and if it just so happens that is something that has to do with the material world, I would never call that a bad thing. That's like saying if you have worn out underwear and you want a fresh pair, that's egotistical. That's fucking ridiculous. Just remember, there is no magical book that fell from the sky that said you cannot want anything from Chanel. But if you buy Fruit of the Loom, you are virtuous. You are the good ones. You will be given the keys to heaven. Nothing like that exists. This is all a matter of preferences that are born, and then a point of expansion that you're syncing up with. And there is nothing different between, wanting something that is non-luxury in the material plane and wanting something luxury in the material plane. The only different thing is the energetics behind it. That's the only thing that's different. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Know that a materialism episode is coming, and I will be diving a lot deeper in that discussion on all of the flawed premises that exist in that discussion. So for myself personally, I don't subscribe to this idea that it's necessarily a negative, destructive adaptation that results in a desire for nice material things. It can, but it's not as prominent as I think people think it is or perceive it as being. So yes, of course, there is a way for it to be a dysfunctional expression of the ego or a regressive expression of the ego, but that is not a universal experience. So I'll be clearing all of that up soon for you. I am sending you all so much love. Don't forget, if you are enjoying these types of conversations, I strongly recommend, I strongly advise that you apply to Eden, because then you get to have me in your pocket. So that is all for today. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, share, get on my newsletter, all of the things, and I will talk to you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye. A good one. Bye-bye. A good one. Bye-bye.